Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to episode 3 of the Groovy Podcast. Today is 19th of June, and I'm Peter Ledbrook, podcasting from merry old England. This week, I'm on my own. I didn't get anybody to interview. Sorry about that, so you're just going to have to live with just me for today. I have enabled the Google Hangouts Q&A app, so I've got it open. So if you know how to use Q&A and you happen to have a question during the middle of the broadcast, then let me know and I'll see what I can do to answer it. So it's been a little while since the last one. There's been plenty of big announcements that I want to talk about. And yeah, I've just been to last week, DevOps UK. That's getting bigger conference now, so that's like around 800 people in total going through the doors, and lots of Java related stuff. So had fun there. Didn't actually get to see many sessions because my good friend Andres Almaray had me implementing things for Lazy Bones, but it's all in a good cause. Anyway, so with that out of the way, let's get on with some actual news items. So we had GreatConf EU beginning of this month. And that was a nice thing about GreatConf EU is it kind of has that very personal feel, and any of the speakers that go, any of the attendees have no problems coming up and chatting to you and asking questions. And that's really nice. You get good feedback. Always makes the speakers feel good when people come up and chat to them about things. Makes us feel important, that kind of thing. So that conference went really well worth a visit if you ever get a chance. And then DevOps UK last week. One of the big things that came out of GreatConf EU was Cedric Champeau's talk on Groovy on Android. Now, as we all know, there was a period of time when you actually had to shut off Twitter because all you read about was Swift. You know, everybody else announced as a language and they're barely a ripple. Apple does it, the whole world explodes. But very interesting language, but it is iOS only. So Cedric's talk was particularly interesting because at the moment, all you can do is write Java for Android. And, you know, Java's not a bad language, but I have to say it has never been much fun for particularly doing UI stuff. I've done a lot of Swing framework-based stuff in my past lives, and yeah, it's not fun. I've even done GWT, and I like the idea of GWT. I didn't like the practice of GWT, and Java's a big factor in that. So suddenly having this opportunity to use something like Groovy on Android, actually having an alternative option, I think should excite a lot of people, particularly the Android developers. So live in his talk, he actually merged the pull request into Groovy Master that basically allows you to build and deploy Groovy applications to Android. And I actually mentioned this in my introduction to Groovy last week, and that already got somebody very interested. So definitely just have a look. There's not an awful lot of work involved. I'll link to at least one of Cedric's blog posts. Basically, you just need Android Studio. It already has a Groovy plugin. There's a Gradle plugin that you can incorporate into your Android build, and that will compile the Groovy for you. And pretty much as long as you use @compile static, you can pretty much do anything that you would expect to be able to do. Normal Groovy, it just builds into an Android application. So not only does Cedric have that blog post and written the Gradle plugin, he also wrote a sample app, GreatConf agenda. So I'll try and remember to put a link to that as well in the show notes. And simply, grab hold of that and try and deploy to your Android phone if you have one. You'll be surprised actually fairly how straightforward it is for Android. I have to say I did spend 15 minutes or more trying to set up Android in the first place that had nothing to do with Groovy. It's a little bit fiddly setup, but once you're there, it's all good. So yeah, hopefully this could be a new avenue to get lots and lots of people into the Groovy community and then part of the ecosystem. already attracting Android developers through the build system being based on Gradle, but actually being able to develop apps. It's not even primarily about getting people into the Groovy ecosystem. It's about offering these poor developers a really solid alternative to writing Java. And at the end of Cedric's talk, he actually had a call to arms, which was, let's help Android development. He has got Groovy running on Android. Let us now update APIs, Groovify APIs to make the whole experience nice, because APIs these days are very important. It's not just language, syntax, and structures that count. Okay, so that was like probably the biggest news. I'm very excited about that, and I hope to spend a little bit more time playing around with it. I still hope to write a blog post about my experience playing with it, getting it working, try and help others get started with it, and yeah, hopefully we'll see big things from there. And that kind of led to the release of Groovy 2.4 beta. So now we know there will be a Groovy 2.4. Apparently there is likely to be a Groovy 2.5 as well. But the Groovy 2.4 beta 1, big change, it works on Android. You can't use Groovy 2.3 or earlier. But more generally, there was a Groovy developer conference which has a lot of discussions around what is going into each of the Groovy versions. I'll put the link in the show notes. But basically, there'll be a move to supporting Java 8 syntax. If you're interested in this, it's definitely worth getting involved in the Groovy Dev mailing list and actually discussing, should we be supporting things like Lambda expression, the syntax for Lambda expressions? What about the method references where you have class : method? Groovy already has a syntax for that, already has closures instead of Lambda functions. How much do we want Groovy to be copy and paste from Java? My personal opinion is we've done kind of well out of it, but it does complicate the language and discourages people from writing idiomatic Groovy. To be honest, I would like to see the Java 8 method reference. I just think it's a little nicer than the dot ampersand or ampersand dot. I can never remember. See, I don't even know which way around they go. So : much easier. Lambda expressions, I don't really see the value of supporting an extra syntax there. But everybody has their own opinion, so definitely get involved with that. Also, updating the Groovy JDK to incorporate the new classes and interfaces in Java 8. It's already, finally we had NIO extensions to, add all the extra file methods now are on the path interface. So, they're looking to add similar things to the Java APIs, such as stream. And kind of interestingly, they're looking at adding a macro system for AST transformations. Now, somebody already has a project called Groovy Macros, and the idea here is to simplify the creation of AST transforms, which I think is a great idea, because basically AST transformations scare me. I mean, the code is all about syntactical structures and manipulating syntactical structures. It's not really my comfort zone, if you like. So having another alternative that makes it easy to create AST transformations without worrying too much about working with block expressions and method nodes and class nodes and all that syntactical stuff, that gets a big thumbs up from me. So they're looking at actually incorporating that existing project, Groovy Macros, into the core. So a lot of good things planned for Groovy 2.4. Sounds like a lot of work. Then there apparently will be a Groovy 2.5, and then eventually we'll get to Groovy 3.0. Not sure when that will be, but of course that'll be the big mop the meta object protocol change, cleaning up a lot of CRUD probably, sort of trying to consolidate the language, hopefully, so you have, to be honest, I'd like there to be fewer ways of doing things. It just kind of adds to the confusion. But we'll see what happens with that. So those are the versions coming along. Grails itself has had a few releases recently, notably 2.4.1 patch release for the 2.4 release and 2.3.10, so mostly bug fixes there. Still expecting more patch releases, certainly on the 2.4 line. Don't know about the 2.3 one. And of course, they are pretty much jumping into the Grails 3 development. Speaking of which, Grails 3 is going to be a big change to the plugins and the plugin system. They're looking at basically deconstructing plugins, taking them apart, and putting them into build bits, code generation bits, and the runtime bits. Working with the startup and actually having plugin stuff in the running application. So now I think is really the time that if you're a plugin author, if you've worked with plugins, now is the time to get involved in discussions on Dev Grails mailing list to kind of say what you would like to see in a new plugin API, because I think that's eventually what's going to come out of this. There will be a new plugin API, and there will undoubtedly be backwards compatibility. Some of the old stuff will remain. Some of it will be split out. But I think it's important for users and plugin authors to actually give their input into that process of developing the plugin API and hopefully formalizing it. A lot is informal. A lot of plugins have done a little bit scary stuff to try and get things working, and hopefully that knowledge from what they had to do before can be put into the plugin API itself. So let's see where that goes. I will try to at least kickstart the conversation myself. I've worked on plenty of plugins, so it's kind of, I feel if I'm going to try and get everybody else involved, I should at least make an effort to do it myself. It's not just do as I say. It should be do as I do as well. Okay, so that's Grails. Another significant Groovy ecosystem project got a very significant release. Griffin, the kind of Groovy desktop application framework. I say Groovy. I think you can still write Griffin applications in Java, but it's a rapid application development framework for desktop applications. Reaching a 2.0, everything apparently pretty much changes. Out goes the built-in Griffin command. Instead, you basically have to use Gradle, and for templates, and shortly, hopefully, soon to be, the code generation, creating controllers, models, views, that kind of thing, that will be managed by Lazybones, which of course my project, so I'm happy, although not so happy because that means that Andres keeps asking me for features. But those features will be ready in the not too distant future. In fact, most of the work is already done. So yeah, that's very interesting. In fact, so Griffin really becomes the runtime component plus Gradle plugins plus Lazybones templates. So effectively offloading as much of the work onto other tools that are more suited for those sorts of things. Gradle is a great build tool. If you can use it, why not use it instead of messing around with your own build system? It's something that Grails 3 will be doing as well. Griffin 2 has just got there quicker. So that beta release is out. Big things change. Gradle has also had a big release. They've just got to 2.0. They had their release candidate 1. This is less of a interesting release compared to kind of other libraries and frameworks, maybe because of the approach that the Gradle guys take. Effectively, they're saying that when we go to 2, it's not going to be about introducing new features or changing entirely the way that Gradle works. It's about changing the baseline for compatibility. It means that they can finally get rid of lots of old stuff that should no longer be there and they don't want to maintain. So yes, stuff will break, but there's been lots of deprecation messages for a long time. So, I think this is a really neat approach to take, saying our versions are basically our baselines of compatibility. It's not feature-driven development. Features get introduced in all the minor releases. So 2.0 RC1 has been released, and shortly after, and announced at the Gradle Summit, I gather, last week, the Gradle plugin portal has been released. So now people can publish their plugins. You publish your plugins to Bintray. Some of you may already be doing that. You then ensure they get added to JCenter, and I believe you need to ask for it to be linked into a Gradle plugins repository as well. I'm not quite sure why you need to do both, possibly because they want the plugin resolution at build time to be against JCenter, but they need the links in Gradle plugins repository to be able to populate the plugin portal. You will also need to qualify your plugin IDs. So, I have a Lazybones Gradle plugin, Lazybones templates Gradle plugin. Now, that is not suitable because it's not qualified. It's in the global namespace. So I will need to effectively add a package to that name. So maybe uk.co.kakwithis.lazybones-template. So more writing, but it's important to ensure there aren't many, if any, conflicts between plugins. I think, last I heard they had about 60 in there. The Nebula plugins from Netflix are in there, and gradually I think more and more people will add them. I kind of missed my opportunity with the 1.1 Lazybones templates plugin, so I'll have to add that qualified ID for the next release when that comes along. So the plugin portal's out there. At the moment, there's not an awful lot. You can basically, they have labels and you can search on labels, or you can just do plain full text search. Otherwise, it's just a flat list of plugins. There are no categories or anything like that yet. I'm sure that will come at some point in the future. But it does mean that you won't have to, hopefully, I think with Gradle 2, you won't have to, or Gradle 2.1, you won't have to mess around with all the build script declarations just to get your plugin available. You will be in the plugin namespace as soon as you publish your plugin to the portal. Okay, so quite a lot of big releases. Won't talk about any more releases for the moment. Just a few tidbits of useful information, some articles that people might find interesting. The first one is an article by David Norton, who explains how you can unit test JavaScript with Spock. And if I remember correctly, this is based on Nashorn. And I think a lot of interesting stuff is going to happen. So if you're not aware of this, Java 8, we've had Rhino, the JavaScript engine in Java for a while now, but it wasn't great. So with Java 8, they effectively created a whole new one called Nashorn. Apparently, it's Nashorn, not Nashorn. And apparently, that's pretty efficient, pretty fast. And I think you're going to see a lot of JavaScript-related stuff appearing based on Nashorn, and one of which is unit testing your JavaScript, client-side, server-side, whatever, using Spock. So we'll have the link to that, so if that's something that sounds interesting, certainly a novel use for me of using Spock, so check that one out. Chris Latimer has also written a couple of blog posts on how to build non-trivial REST APIs, so in Grails 2.3. So if you look in the user guide, Grails user guide, it will show you examples of very, very basic, simple REST APIs, but nothing real world is ever that simple. So it's nice to see someone going a little bit more in depth and discussing how do you keep an API up to date? How do you manage changes to that API? all these other considerations when you actually build a real-world REST API. So definitely worth that one's worth a look. I also discovered, thanks to Andres Almire again, a project called Gmaven Plus. Now, I was aware of Gmaven, and I was aware of the Eclipse, the Eclipse compiler for Groovy. There's a Maven plugin that allows you to incorporate that into your Maven builds. I was using that for my example Maven builds. But now there's a Gmaven Plus, which I think is a rewrite of Gmaven, which allows you to build Groovy with Java in a Maven project, but it also allows you to embed Groovy scripts inside your Maven build. So any of that custom functionality that you'd have to write a Maven plugin for, you can instead use Maven Plus and a Groovy script. So yeah, check that out. It's all new. I haven't looked at it much myself, but that may be the way to incorporate Groovy into your Maven builds. Mr. Hackey, famous to many people, he does his Groovy goodness, Grails goodness, Gradle goodness, many goodnesses. It's like blog posts. He's also taken a lot of those blog posts and created a LeanPub book out of them. So that just gets a whole load of useful tips and tricks into a single book. So worth checking that out. He's recently done a Spock-like one on Spock on how to use data variables for labels. Now, I only mainly mention this because I didn't know about it before. Mr. Hackey apparently got it from Rob Fletcher, who does a lot of Spock talks. He's working on a LeanPub, I think, Spock book as well. And this allows you to, if you're not familiar, if you use a where block in Spock, you can put sort of placeholders in the feature method name using hash name of your where variable. And then when the test is run, that hash variable will be replaced by the value of that variable at runtime. So this allows your feature methods, especially in test reports, to show more useful information about which test is being run. Well, this little blog post shows you how to add extra variables that aren't actually part of the data set for your test, but instead are purely used so they can be embedded in the feature method name so that you get more readable, useful labels. Try to explain it without actually showing it, so I recommend that you definitely check the blog post, and then it will be blatantly obvious what I'm badly trying to explain. So it's a very neat trick. I did just try it on my lazybones tests, and it's actually really nice. And I definitely, if you do Spock, definitely start using that technique. I think it really helps with your test reports. I just want to end the broadcast discussion about Groovy user guide. So I want to contribute to Groovy, but I'm definitely out of my comfort zone, not only with AST transformations, but the whole language, ANTLR grammars, and all that stuff. I can contribute to APIs, but I feel that one of the easiest areas to contribute is the user guide, because Groovy hasn't had a single user guide for people to come to learn about the language. I mean, this is really the first effort. There's been the wiki, but it's been fairly unstructured, not particularly friendly. So this is the first effort to structure that and make it more appealing to new users and existing users. And they're trying to incorporate a language specification as well. So documentation, I do a fair bit of writing as part of my living. So it's kind of an obvious choice for me to help contribute to the project. Also, if you're considering getting involved, it's based on AsciiDoc. So, if you've not done AsciiDoc before, it's a great way to learn about that tool. I think it's Markdown is great for single articles, for READMEs, that kind of thing. But if you want to do something larger, a user guide, a book, or anything like that, anything that might have any kind of typesetting involved, you definitely should be looking at AsciiDoc instead. Or if you're Russell Winder, then it's LaTeX. But I'm too old to learn LaTeX, so AsciiDoc is where I'm going to concentrate my attention. And especially there's a Groovy, as part of the Groovy build, you can very easily build the user docs, just creates HTML. All the sections are already there. There are just a lot of TBDs to be done. And basically, you just need to take out the source code, edit the AsciiDoc files, and add to the sections. I have effectively challenged myself to allocate half an hour to an hour a day to work on the user guide. And actually that's just enough time to do a little section. But if lots of people do little sections, then the user guide will finish much more quickly, and it will also help the core Groovy developers to focus on Groovy, developing Groovy, rather than working on the user guide. So yes, they still need to handle your contributions, but that's a lot less work than actually doing all the writing themselves. Unfortunately, as it stands, there's no real formal way to say I am going to be working on such and such part of the book, such that everybody knows what everybody else is doing. This is partly because not many people are contributing at the moment. But if my exercise and my appeal kind of gets more people involved, then that does become an issue. I hope people do become involved. So my current recommendation, in the absence of anything formal, is to actually create a branch and make changes, find a section that you'd like to work on, label it next to a section header, in parentheses, put your name or initials, whatever you want, all the sections that you want to work on, commit that, push it, pull request, and once that's incorporated into the main Groovy core repository, you can start working on it, because at that point, anybody that updates their source code from Groovy core will see this has been marked by such and such who wants to work on it. I recommend full names rather than initials. It makes it easier to track people down if there's a section that has been reserved but hasn't actually seen any work for a week or two. So it's important you only reserve small sections that you know you're going to finish in a day or two. I also recommend reserving, say, a day in advance. It's not absolutely necessary right now, but if more people get involved, that will be necessary until a decision is made to do something more formal. So if you've used Groovy, then you can pretty much help with some part of the documentation. Even if it's just reviewing what's already been written, clearing things up, clarifying things, all these sorts of areas help. And if you just allocate an hour or two, even a week, if enough people, if 10, 50, 100 people do that, then there will be very fast progress on the user guide. So I'm trying to reserve half an hour to an hour per day. I'm not expecting anyone else to do anything that silly, but certainly, if you can reserve time per week, that would be great. Or even per month. Every little bit counts. As in democracy, an individual vote doesn't count for much, but when you've got all the votes counted together, all the votes from like-minded people form a big block that actually has an impact. So it's similar to that. I will try to write a blog post on getting started with the Groovy user guide. So hopefully maybe by the end of this weekend, fingers crossed. I also, of course, want to do the one on Groovy on Android. But even if I don't manage to do that, it's really not that difficult. You just need to clone the repository, check it out. Fork the repository, clone it, make your changes, reserve the sections you want, send a pull request with those, and then just make your changes to whatever section you want to work on. Okay, so that's it for today. Next week, I'm hoping to have Baruch from JFrog interview, and I'll be hoping to talk to him about the Gradle announcements. How long have they been had the Bintray stuff in the works? How is Bintray going? And all those things. How long have they been working with Groovy and Gradle and all the other tools? Because JFrog have been very active with the Groovy community for a long time. So there should be some interesting stuff to learn from that. So that's next week. Probably Thursday, but I'll let you know when that's confirmed. Otherwise, don't forget GreatConf US end of next month, and beginning of September is Spring 1 2GX, and at the end of this year, November, Devox Belgium. So hopefully I will see you at one of those, especially fingers crossed if I get invited to Devox Belgium. Thank you for listening. I hope you've learned some stuff. Don't forget, if you've got any feedback, then you can probably add comments to YouTube, or just send me a tweet at @pledbrook on Twitter. And I hope to hear from you and catch up with you next week. Bye-bye.